The galaxy was vast, teeming with species both ancient and new, each striving for dominance. But as the centuries passed, a new power began to grow, one that would soon cast a shadow across the entire cosmos. Humanity, once a small and inconsequential race on the fringes of the galaxy, had risen from the ashes of their violent past and begun to spread their influence across the stars. This was not a slow, steady expansion like the others who had come before them. No, this was different. It began with the formation of the United Earth Federation, a coalition of all nations on Earth. Human ingenuity and a thirst for survival had driven them to a level of technological sophistication that surpassed even the most advanced alien races. They developed faster-than-light travel, unlocking the potential for colonization and trade with distant planets. Yet, as they spread out into the stars, the galaxy took notice. At first, the aliens saw the humans as a curiosity. They were a race with fire and ambition, willing to risk everything for progress, but they were nothing more than a nuisance. After all, what was a single, young species compared to the might of the centuries-old empires that ruled the galaxy? But the humans had a secret, one that not even the ancient civilizations of the galaxy could have predicted. It wasn't just their technology that set them apart. It was their spirit. A drive that pushed them to innovate, adapt, and conquer in ways no other species had. Where others saw obstacles, humans saw opportunities. Where other species followed traditions, humans built their own destiny. Their unyielding will to survive and evolve became their greatest weapon. The first sign of humanity's ascendancy came during the Battle of Proxima Centauri. A coalition of alien races had attempted to crush a human colony on the edge of the system, thinking it would be a simple task to snuff out the young and naive species. But the humans had other ideas. Armed with cutting-edge weaponry and tactics that none of their enemies had anticipated, they fought back with a ferocity that shocked the invaders. In a matter of days, the human fleet had destroyed the alien armada and secured the colony's future. That victory, however, was just the beginning. The humans were no longer seen as weak or vulnerable. Word spread across the galaxy of their unexpected strength. And soon, the galactic superpowers, behemoth empires built on millennia of history, took notice. Some saw the humans as a potential ally, hoping to gain favor with the new rising force. Others, however, were less kind. They feared the human race's rapid ascension and the potential threat it posed to their own centuries-old dominance. The most prominent of these powers was the Zorith Collective, a ruthless race of alien conquerors known for their superior psychic abilities and militaristic ways. The Zorith had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, bending entire species to their will. For years, they had watched the humans from a distance, studying them, calculating their rise. Now, they could no longer ignore the threat that humanity represented. The first encounter between the Zorith and the humans came when a Zorith fleet crossed into human territory, seemingly testing the waters. A tense peace had existed between the two since the humans' early expansion, but that fragile calm shattered and the Zorith attempted to annex a key human colony in the Alpha Centauri system. The Zorith demanded that the humans submit, but they underestimated one thing: humanity's unyielding determination. Instead of kneeling to the mighty Zorith, the humans fought back with every ounce of their spirit. They fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen, brutal, relentless, and ingenious. The humans had no superhuman abilities or age-old technologies to rely on, but they had something more powerful: sheer willpower and adaptability. The humans, outnumbered and outmatched in many ways, managed to hold their ground. But more importantly, they sent a message to the galaxy that humanity would not be cowed. The Zorith retreated for the moment, but they made one thing clear: this was far from over. But the humans had already made their own statement: they would no longer be overlooked. The first steps toward the Galactic Empire of the human race had been taken. Back on Earth, the United Earth Federation made a bold decision. A council was convened, and with it came a vision, one that would unite all of humanity under a single banner. No longer would Earth be fragmented by national borders or petty politics. The time had come for humanity to form a galactic empire, to extend its reach beyond the stars and bring order to the chaos of the galaxy. the Galactic Empire of the human race was born. In the coming years, humanity would face many challenges, more alien invasions, political intrigue, and struggles for control of the galaxy's most valuable resources. But one thing was certain, the humans had proven themselves. They were not the weaklings of the galaxy. They were its future. The era of the human empire had begun, and nothing would stand in its way. The formation of the Galactic Empire of the human race was not a peaceful affair. While many across Earth cheered for the unification, not everyone was so eager to embrace the new order. The United Earth Federation had long been a coalition of different nations, each with its own interests, cultures, and ambitions. Now, in the wake of humanity's victory at Proxima Centauri and the looming threat from the Zorith, there was a deep divide over how best to lead this new empire. On one side were the globalists, leaders from the Federation's core nations who saw the need for a central government to consolidate humanity's power and resources. These leaders pushed for a new, authoritative system, one that could rival the ancient galactic empires. They envisioned a future where humanity would not only defend its colonies but expand across the galaxy, bringing order and stability to the chaos of the stars. On the other side were the decentralists, factions within the Federation who feared losing autonomy and power to a centralized empire. They believed that humanity's strength lay in its diversity and the freedom of individual nations. The idea of a single, monolithic government controlling the fate of every human across countless worlds was deeply troubling to them. Would a galactic empire come to resemble the oppressive regimes of the Zorith and other alien powers? Could humanity survive under the weight of a single ruler's authority? As tensions between the factions grew, the Federation held a pivotal summit, an event that would determine the fate of humanity's future. The summit was held in the heart of Earth's capital, New Beijing, and it was broadcast to every corner of the human-controlled space. Inside the Grand Hall, world leaders, military commanders, and influential diplomats gathered to debate the future of the empire. At the center of the room stood President Lydia Selim, the charismatic and visionary leader of the United Earth Federation. She was a strong proponent of unification, having recognized the unique opportunity to secure humanity's place in the galaxy. But as she addressed the assembly, it was clear that the road ahead would not be easy. Fellow leaders of Earth, President Selim began, her voice calm yet resolute, we have built something extraordinary. The rise of humanity in the stars is a testament to our strength and resilience. But it is not enough to be a coalition of fragmented worlds. To secure our future, we must stand together. We must become an empire, a unified force that can defend our interests and lead the galaxy into a new era. Her words were met with a mix of applause and skepticism. Some leaders stood in full support, ready to see Earth's legacy forged as an empire. But others, especially from smaller nations and outer colonies, voiced concerns. They feared that under the new system, they would be relegated to mere provinces, their voices lost to the ever-growing bureaucracy of a galactic regime. In the weeks that followed, the debate raged on. At the heart of it all was the question of leadership. Who would lead the galactic empire of the human race? And how would they maintain the balance between unity and freedom? The answer came in the form of a political compromise, a council system that would represent each of humanity's worlds while placing ultimate authority in the hands of an elected emperor. This emperor would wield vast power but would be bound by a council of representatives, ensuring that no single world or faction could dominate the empire. After months of deliberation, the first imperial election was held. The candidates were many, but one stood out above the rest, Admiral Isaac Holden. A decorated war hero who had commanded the fleet during humanity's most critical battles, Holden was beloved by the people for his military prowess and his unflinching loyalty to humanity's survival. His platform was simple: unite humanity under a strong central government, prepare for future threats, and expand the empire's reach to the farthest corners of the galaxy. But Holden's candidacy was not without controversy. He was a man of action, not politics. His supporters loved him for his decisiveness, but his detractors feared his militaristic tendencies. Would he become a tyrant, wielding the power of the empire to enforce his vision with an iron fist? In the final days before the election, a shadowy faction of conspirators, known only as the Crimson Circle, attempted to destabilize the political process. They were a collection of rogue military officers and influential businessmen who believed Holden's rise would be disastrous for their own interests. The Crimson Circle orchestrated a series of bombings and assassination attempts in a last-ditch effort to derail Holden's campaign. But Holden proved to be more than a figurehead. With a steady hand and strategic brilliance, he uncovered the conspiracy and crushed it before it could spread. This act of defiance only increased his popularity, and the Empire's citizens rallied behind him as a symbol of strength and resilience. On the day of the election, it was clear who would win. Holden was elected emperor, and the Galactic Empire of the human race was officially born. The world, as well as the far-flung colonies and outposts across the galaxy, watched in awe as the Empire was solidified under his rule. Yet even as Holden took the throne, there was an undercurrent of tension. The Empire's enemies were many, and even from within, dissent simmered. Would the humans' new order stand the test of time, or would the cracks in the foundation soon begin to show? The unification of humanity was complete, but the true battle for the Empire's survival had just begun. Emperor Isaac Holden sat at the imperial throne, looking out over the vast expanse of space through the towering windows of the imperial palace on Earth. His reign had begun, and with it, the hopes and dreams of billions across the galaxy rested on his shoulders. The Galactic Empire of the human race was now a reality, and it was already being tested. Less than a month into his rule, a threat appeared on the Empire's doorstep, one that no one had seen coming. The Zorith Collective, still reeling from their defeat at the hands of humanity, had returned with a vengeance. They were not content to let the human race grow unchecked any longer. The Zorith were preparing for war, and this time, they came with a force unlike anything humanity had faced before. The first sign of the Zorith invasion came from the outer reaches of human space, near the Betelgeuse system. A small human colony, barely more than a mining outpost, sent out a distress signal. The message was brief but chilling: the Zorith are coming. We cannot hold them off. Holden knew immediately that this was not a coincidence. The Zorith had been watching humanity's rise for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. The time had come, and they were no longer going to bide their time. The news spread like wildfire across the Empire. The Senate was convened in emergency session, with leaders from every corner of human space gathering to discuss the looming threat. The debate was tense, as factions within the Empire had different views on how to approach the Zorith. Some advocated for a diplomatic solution, suggesting that humanity could avoid war by offering terms of peace. Others, like General Helena Voss of the Imperial Armed Forces, argued that war was inevitable. The Zorith want nothing less than our complete submission, she declared. We cannot negotiate with them. They will not stop until we are nothing but another footnote in their bloody history. Holden listened carefully to both sides, his sharp mind weighing the options. In the end, he made a decision. We will prepare for war, he said, his voice unwavering. But we will offer them a choice. If they wish to fight, they will face the full might of the human empire. If they wish to negotiate, they will have to show us that they respect our sovereignty. But make no mistake, we will never bow to them. The first battle between the Zorith and the human empire took place in the heart of the Betelgeuse system, where the Zorith had launched a surprise assault on the human colony. The Zorith fleet, a massive armada of warships and dreadnoughts, arrived in full force, overwhelming the outpost's defenses in a matter of hours. Humanity's response was swift. Admiral Lila Zhang, a rising star in the Imperial Navy, commanded the fleet sent to intercept the Zorith. Her fleet was smaller, but they were quick, determined, and technologically advanced. Using hit-and-run tactics, they harried the Zorith ships, drawing them into a trap. The battle was brutal, but it was also a testament to humanity's innovation and resolve. The Zorith, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with sheer numbers, had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt. The humans used a combination of electronic warfare and advanced tactics to disable key Zorith warships, crippling their command structure. In the end, the Zorith were forced to retreat, but not without heavy losses. Holden watched the battle unfold from his command center on Earth. He had never wavered in his belief that humanity's strength lay not just in their technology, but in their will to fight and win. The victory at Betelgeuse was a clear message to the galaxy: the human empire would not be cowed. But while the battle was a victory, the war was far from over. The Zorith regrouped, and soon reports flooded in from across human space. The collective was massing an even larger fleet, preparing for a full-scale invasion of the Empire. The stakes had grown higher, and the stakes were personal for Holden. The Emperor had always known that his rise to power would not be without cost. The Zorith were just the beginning. There were other factions, alien species, rebel factions, even humans who had not fully embraced the Empire's vision, who would rise to challenge him. But Holden was resolute. He had fought for this moment, and he would not let it slip away. In the coming weeks, Holden called for the mobilization of the entire Imperial armed forces. He understood that the fate of humanity would be decided not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of its people. He worked tirelessly to rally the citizens of the Empire, forging alliances with various factions within the galaxy, and strengthening the resolve of those under his command. As the Zorith prepared for their next strike, Holden was faced with his first true test as Emperor. How far was he willing to go to protect the Empire? Would he risk everything to defend humanity's future, or would he find himself torn between the brutal demands of war and the idealistic vision of peace that had driven him to this point? The fate of the Galactic Empire of the human race, and the future of humanity itself, hung in the balance. The Zorith were coming. The signals were unmistakable. Long-range scans detected the massing of their fleet at the edge of human-controlled space. The battle at Betelgeuse had been a victory, but Holden knew it was merely a brief respite before the storm. The collective's vengeance was inevitable. The Zorith were a race of relentless conquerors, and they had only grown more determined after their humiliating defeat. This time, there would be no holding back. Holden had ordered the full mobilization of the Imperial armed forces. Every ship in the Imperial Navy was being pressed into service, every soldier, every officer was on high alert. The galaxy's largest military campaign was about to begin. And with it, the price of victory would be measured not only in battles fought, but in lives lost. The Emperor's first task was to establish a solid defense line in the outer rim of human space. A series of fortresses, including the newly constructed Titan stations, massive orbital defense platforms, were deployed to key systems along the frontier. These would serve as the first line of defense, buying time for the Empire's main fleets to arrive and repel the invaders. If the Zorith breached the outer defenses, they would move in on the most valuable worlds of the human empire, Earth itself, the heart of the Empire, and its greatest prize. Admiral Lila Zhang was appointed to oversee the Outer Rim's defenses. She had proven herself during the Battle of Betelgeuse and had earned Holden's trust. Her fleet was positioned in the most vulnerable sectors, ready to meet the Zorith head-on. But as the days passed, the reports grew more ominous. The Zorith were advancing faster than expected, coordinating their fleets with frightening precision. They were closing in on the Titan stations. Holden could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His vision of the Empire was still in its infancy, and yet the very existence of the Empire was threatened by forces he had yet to fully understand. The Zorith were ruthless. They had crushed civilizations across the galaxy, and their psychic abilities were legendary. Humanity had no such power, but they had something else, their unyielding will to survive. But that will would soon be tested to its limits. The first full-scale battle of the war took place in the Kuiper Belt, just outside the Outer Rim. The Zorith had broken through the Titan station's defenses and were now making a direct assault on human territory. Admiral Zhang's fleet engaged the enemy in a battle that would come to be known as the Bloodfall Campaign, a name that would later send shivers down the spines of every Imperial citizen. The battle was chaos incarnate. The Zorith fleet was massive, its warships towering and intimidating, bristling with weapons and power. They were faster and more maneuverable than human ships, their psychic abilities allowing them to anticipate every move. Yet the humans fought back with the same determination that had won them countless victories in the past. The humans used every trick in their arsenal: ambushes, decoys, and coordinated assaults, to level the playing field. But the Zorath were relentless. As the battle raged on, the human forces began to lose ground. Zhang's fleet was being outnumbered, and her ships were taking heavy losses. The Zorath had no intention of negotiating, they intended to crush humanity once and for all. Admiral Zhang fought with all the ferocity she could muster, but the enemy's numbers and psychic prowess were overwhelming. One by one, human ships were destroyed or disabled, and the fleets were being driven back toward the inner systems. Holden watched the battle from his command center, his face grim. He knew the human fleet was fighting valiantly, but the cost of victory was becoming clear. The Zorath would not back down, and human lives were being lost in the thousands. Even though the human military was formidable, they lacked the overwhelming numbers of the Zorath, and the cost of war was becoming a heavy burden. The Emperor had to make a choice. He could continue the fight, hoping for a miracle, or he could take a more drastic step, one that would ensure humanity's survival, but at an even greater cost. With the Zorath closing in on Earth itself, Holden made the decision to activate the last line of defense, the Imperial War Doctrine. This doctrine, developed during the early days of the Empire's formation, was humanity's most extreme option. It called for the use of devastating weapons, planetary destroyers, long-range nuclear warheads, and experimental technologies capable of decimating entire fleets. It was a final gambit, one that humanity had sworn never to use unless absolutely necessary. Holden's decision was met with shock by his advisors and the Imperial Council. Some believed that it was too soon to resort to such drastic measures, but the situation had reached a point where there seemed to be no other option. The Zorath had to be stopped, or humanity would be crushed under their boot. The order was given. The Imperial Navy launched its full counteroffensive. The Zorath fleet, now within striking distance of Earth, was caught off guard as humanity's devastating weapons fired upon them. Massive orbital weapons platforms unleashed concentrated energy blasts that cut through the Zorath warships like a hot knife through butter. Human battleships unleashed their nuclear payloads, and the skies above Earth lit up with explosions that rivaled the intensity of supernovas. The Zorath fleet was shattered. But the victory was not without its price. The devastation was catastrophic. While the Zorath fleet was destroyed, the fallout from the weapons used would take years to fully assess. Thousands of soldiers had perished, and entire fleets had been obliterated. The damage to the infrastructure and colonies was also significant, and the toll on morale was almost as great as the physical destruction. Holden stood before the people of Earth, his face hard and unyielding, but his heart weighed down by the cost of the victory. The Empire had survived, but at a terrible cost. The war was far from over, and humanity's place in the galaxy was still uncertain. The Zorath had been defeated for now, but the price of that victory had left a deep scar on the soul of the Empire. The galaxy was watching, and Holden knew that this was only the beginning of humanity's struggle to secure its future. The dust had barely settled from the catastrophic victory against the Zorath when the Empire began to feel the weight of its own success. The war with the Collective had drained resources, and the cost of victory had left deep scars across human space. As Earth and its colonies struggled to rebuild, another, more insidious threat emerged, one that had been quietly festering beneath the surface of the Galactic Empire. Despite Holden's triumph, dissent was growing within the Empire. Among the political elite, whispers of discontent and dissatisfaction began to spread. The brutal tactics used to defeat the Zorath had left some citizens questioning the Emperor's methods. Was he truly the leader they had hoped for, or was he becoming something darker? Even within the military, there were growing concerns over Holden's increasing reliance on authoritarian control and the use of devastating weapons. At the heart of this unrest was the Imperial Senate, a body meant to represent the various sectors and factions of the Empire. For the past several months, the Senate had been embroiled in debates over the Emperor's powers. Some senators were calling for greater checks on Holden's authority, claiming that the Emperor was consolidating power in ways that were never intended. Others, still loyal to the Emperor, argued that the galaxy was in a state of constant crisis, and only a strong, unified government could ensure humanity's survival. But the most dangerous voice in the Senate was that of Senator Kalen Thorne, a charismatic and ambitious leader from one of the Empire's wealthiest colonies. Thorn had once been a staunch ally of Holden, but the cost of the war and the Emperor's increasingly dictatorial rule had driven a wedge between them. Thorn had been laying the groundwork for a rebellion, rallying like-minded senators, military officers, and industrial magnates to his cause. He claimed that the Empire had strayed too far from its original ideals, that Holden's rule had become a tyrannical monarchy that sought to crush any dissent. Thorn's movement was gaining traction. Behind closed doors, he met with disgruntled generals and influential figures who were all too eager to see the Emperor brought down. The Zorith War, despite its victory, had shown how fragile the Empire truly was, and Thorn presented himself as the answer, someone who could restore the balance of power and give the people a voice once more. The first signs of rebellion came when a fleet loyal to Thorn's cause, made up of several powerful warships and thousands of soldiers, declared independence from the Empire. The fleet, calling itself the Sovereign Faction, launched an attack on one of the Empire's outer rim colonies, Tora Station, a vital supply hub for the Imperial Navy. It was a bold move, and one that sent shockwaves through the Empire. Holden had long suspected that something like this might happen, but the scale of the betrayal was still a shock. Thorn, a man who had been at his side during the war, had turned against him in a bid for power. Holden understood the reasons, but it didn't make the betrayal any less painful. He immediately called for a meeting with his closest advisors. General Helena Voss, who had been instrumental in the war against the Zorith, was the first to speak. "This is no small rebellion, sir," she said, her voice tense. "Thorn's fleet is strong, and his supporters are not just a few discontented civilians. He has the backing of several high-ranking officers and influential Senate members. Can we put it down with force?" Holden asked, his face hard. He wasn't one to hesitate when faced with threats, but this was different. This was a betrayal by one of his own. "We could," Voss replied. "But it would be costly. Thorn's fleet is sizable, and there's no telling how far his influence stretches. We could lose more ships, more lives, and that's not counting the political fallout. There are factions in the Senate that already don't trust you. If we crush this rebellion, it could fracture the Empire." Holden understood. He had already sacrificed so much for the Empire's survival. Could he afford to lose even more, both in terms of resources and loyalty? The stakes had never been higher. But Holden was no stranger to tough choices. He knew that the survival of the Empire meant more than any one individual, no matter how close they were. Thorn's actions couldn't be allowed to go unchecked. "I'll give him one chance to stand down," Holden said, his voice calm but resolute. "But if he refuses, we'll bring him to heel. The Empire can't afford to show weakness now." The response from Thorn was swift and defiant. He refused to back down, instead issuing a message to the people of the Empire: "The time of tyranny is over. The people of the galaxy deserve better than an emperor who rules with fear. It is time to restore freedom to the stars." For the first time since the founding of the Empire, Holden felt the full weight of the distrust and division that had taken root. The galaxy had been united by the promise of a stronger, more secure future, but now, the very foundations of that unity were crumbling. The war that followed would not be fought only in the stars. It would be fought in the hearts and minds of every citizen, every soldier, every leader. The Sovereign Faction, led by Thorn, quickly began to rally more support across the Empire, drawing in those who felt alienated by Holden's heavy-handed rule. Rebel fleets struck key Imperial supply lines, and partisan groups carried out sabotage operations on Imperial worlds. Holden faced his most personal and difficult battle yet. He had to put down a rebellion, but he had to do so without alienating the very people he had sworn to protect. He would need to balance the strength of his empire with the need to preserve its ideals. If he failed, the empire would fracture, and humanity's place in the galaxy would be uncertain once more. In the end, it wasn't just about defeating Thorn's forces. It was about winning back the trust of the galaxy. And for Holden, that would mean making sacrifices he had never anticipated, even if it meant facing the harsh reality of betrayal at the hands of someone he had once considered a friend. The war with the Sovereign faction was unlike anything Holden had ever faced. The battlefield stretched across the galaxy, not just in the stars but also in the hearts of the people. The rebellion led by Senator Kalen Thorne was more than a military challenge, it was a political and ideological war for the future of the Empire. As the Sovereign faction's forces gathered strength, their influence grew beyond the rebel fleets. Thorne's movement began to rally citizens disillusioned by the Emperor's methods. The war against the Zorith had brought humanity closer together, but the price had been high. Many citizens, especially on the Outer Rim and among the colonies, felt abandoned or oppressed by the authoritarian rule that Holden had adopted to maintain control. They had hoped for prosperity, but instead, they had seen a heavy-handed empire that demanded loyalty at all costs. The first blow to the empire came from within. A series of coordinated strikes by rebel cells attacked Imperial infrastructure across key systems. Factories producing military-grade weapons were destroyed. Communications hubs went dark. Even the Titan stations, humanity's pride in space defense, were compromised. It became clear that Thorne's influence was far-reaching, and his supporters were entrenched in the military and civilian sectors alike. Holden could no longer afford to sit idly by. He had to act, but this time, his decisions carried even more weight than before. He needed to strike at the heart of the rebellion, to root out its leaders and expose the truth behind Thorne's ideology. But at the same time, he had to avoid an all-out purge that would only deepen the divides within the Empire. The stakes were too high to be reckless. The Emperor's first move was to deploy his most trusted commanders and strike teams to infiltrate the Sovereign faction's strongholds. General Voss, who had long been a steadfast supporter of Holden, was assigned to lead a covert mission to locate and capture Thorne. She had spent years tracking down rebels and insurgents across the Empire, but this mission was different. Thorne wasn't just a leader of a faction, he was the symbol of all the discontent simmering in the hearts of those who felt abandoned by the Empire. Capturing him would be a blow to the rebellion, but killing him might ignite a firestorm that could tear the Empire apart. Voss led her forces to a remote colony on the fringe of Imperial space, one of the last known strongholds of the Sovereign faction. The colony, once a thriving mining world, had fallen into disrepair and decay, a perfect hiding place for those seeking to escape Holden's watchful eyes. But it was also a place where the hearts of many had turned against the Empire. On the surface, the colony was a ghost town. Abandoned buildings and empty streets gave no hint of the rebel cells operating beneath the surface. As Voss and her team scoured the planet for intelligence, they uncovered a secret: Thorne wasn't just hiding there. He was building something, a weapon that could change the course of the war. In the deep caverns beneath the colony, Voss discovered a hidden facility. There, a fleet of advanced warships was under construction, ships unlike anything the Empire had ever seen. Thorne was not only amassing an army of loyal followers, he was preparing for a war on a scale that could rival the Zorith invasion. These ships were designed to be faster, more powerful, and more lethal than any Imperial warship. If they were completed, they could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. With the information she had gathered, Voss sent a desperate transmission back to Holden. The stakes had never been higher. Thorne was preparing to strike at the heart of the Empire, and he had the means to do it. Holden, now fully aware of the threat, ordered an immediate response. He knew the only way to neutralize Thorne's growing power was to take out the secret shipyard before the new fleet was completed. But the mission would be risky. To reach the facility, Voss and her forces would have to infiltrate a heavily fortified rebel base, and time was running out. Every moment they delayed brought the new fleet closer to completion. As Voss prepared her forces for the assault, Holden began to question his own decisions. The rebellion had become a personal vendetta for both sides. Was he truly the ruler the galaxy needed, or had he become the very thing he had fought against? The stakes of the war against Thorne were no longer just about political control, they were about the soul of the Empire. Could he win without losing the very ideals that had inspired humanity's rise to power? The time for doubt had passed. Voss and her elite task force launched their assault on the rebel base with precision and speed. The skies above the colony were filled with explosions as the Imperial fleet engaged the rebels in orbit, drawing the attention of Thorn's forces. Meanwhile, on the surface, Voss led her team into the depths of the rebel facility. They fought their way through resistance, cutting down insurgents and disabling traps set to slow them down. At the heart of the facility, Voss and her team discovered the weapon, a prototype battleship that was unlike anything the Empire had seen. It was powered by a new form of energy that could tear through the thickest armor, its weapons capable of devastating entire fleets with a single salvo. It was the weapon Thorn had been building to strike at Earth itself. In a moment of clarity, Voss realized what had to be done. She couldn't allow this weapon to fall into Thorn's hands. With the enemy fleet closing in on the colony, she made a bold decision. Rather than try to capture Thorn or destroy the facility from the outside, she ordered the team to sabotage the weapon, setting charges to detonate it before it could ever be used. As the countdown began, Voss made her escape, leaving the facility in ruins. The rebel fleet was crushed, and the prototype weapon was destroyed in a brilliant explosion that lit up the sky. But Thorn had already escaped, slipping away into the shadows. The war was far from over. Holden received word of the success, but he knew that victory had come at a cost. The rebellion had lost its most powerful weapon, but Thorn was still alive, and his supporters were more determined than ever. The Empire was at a crossroads. The fight for the galaxy's future had entered a new phase, and the heart of the rebellion was far from finished. The galaxy was in turmoil. After the destruction of the prototype battleship and the crushing of the Sovereign faction's key stronghold, the war had reached a critical juncture. But despite the setback, Thorn's rebellion was far from defeated. The rogue senator had disappeared into the far reaches of space, but his influence had only grown stronger. His followers, scattered across human space, now saw him as a martyr, a symbol of resistance against a tyrannical emperor. The heart of the rebellion was still beating, and the Empire was no closer to peace than before. Holden stood on the observation deck of the Imperial Palace, staring out at the vastness of space. The stars had always been a source of hope for humanity, but now they felt distant, cold, and indifferent. The war had taken its toll on him, physically and mentally. He had led humanity through the crucible of war, yet every victory had left a scar. The cost of the Empire's survival was mounting, and Holden couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it. As the Emperor of the Galactic Empire, Holden had forged humanity's place in the stars. He had united the galaxy, crushed the Zorith invasion, and defeated the greatest threat to the Empire's future, the Sovereign faction. But the deeper he looked into the galaxy's heart, the more he saw fractures. Every rebellion, every skirmish, every betrayal seemed to expose a vulnerability that threatened to undo everything he had fought for. The Imperial Council had become increasingly divided. Some of his closest allies, like General Voss, were becoming more disillusioned with his leadership. The war, though necessary, had created a rift between the Emperor and the very people he had sworn to protect. The power he had amassed was now a burden, one that was eroding the ideals that had brought humanity to this point. Was he truly building a new order, or was he constructing an empire that would crumble under the weight of its own contradictions? In the aftermath of the recent battles, Holden ordered an inquiry into the causes of the rebellion and the growing dissent within the empire. It became clear that the war was not just about military supremacy, it was about the soul of humanity. The rebellion, while dangerous, had sparked a long-overdue debate about the direction of the empire. Could a single man, no matter how powerful, dictate the future of an entire galaxy, or should the people have more of a say in their own destiny? The emperor called for a summit with the leaders of the Imperial Senate, the military, and the most influential colonies. The meeting was tense. For the first time since the empire's founding, Holden was faced with the possibility of losing his absolute authority. Senators, generals, and leaders from every corner of human space took their seats, their faces a mix of skepticism, hope, and fear. They all understood the stakes, and for the first time, they questioned whether the Empire could survive the weight of its own creation. Senator Kalen Thorne's name was on everyone's lips. Though he had disappeared from the battlefield, his ideas had taken root. the rebellion had become more than a military movement, it had become a philosophy. It was a call for freedom, a rejection of the Empire's absolute control. Thorn had painted himself as a savior, a liberator, and his followers were willing to die for that cause. Holden addressed the summit, his voice steady but strained. I've led humanity through the fires of war, through battles that would have broken lesser civilizations. But I know I cannot do this alone. I understand now that the galaxy cannot be ruled by fear alone. It must be ruled by a new vision, one that honors the sacrifices made and learns from the mistakes of the past. There was a long pause in the room, as if the very air had thickened with uncertainty. The senators exchanged glances, some unsure whether to believe the Emperor's words, others ready to take the next step toward a new era. Holden continued, the Empire will change. We will be stronger, but we will also be more just. We will create a future where the voices of all citizens, all colonies, are heard and valued. I cannot undo the mistakes of the past, but I can ensure that they are not repeated. General Voss, who had been at Holden's side throughout the war, stood up. Her expression was unreadable. You've spoken of change, Emperor. But change means sacrifice. Can we afford it? Holden met her gaze. We can't afford to stagnate. The galaxy has changed, and we must change with it. If the Empire is to endure, it must evolve. And that evolution begins with us, together, as one. The summit was a turning point. It was clear that the Empire could not continue as it had. A new government was forged that day, one that balanced the power of the Emperor with the needs and rights of the people. The Senate was expanded, granting more representation to the colonies and factions that had long been neglected. Military leadership would no longer be centralized in the hands of a single figure, but instead would be shared by a council of trusted commanders. But the real test was yet to come. Would Thorn, the symbol of rebellion, see this as a true offer of peace, or would he continue his war? The galaxy was still on edge, and the future remained uncertain. As Holden looked out at the stars once more, he realized that the fight for the Empire was far from over. It was not a fight for territory or power, it was a fight for the future of humanity. The legacy of the Empire would not be defined by conquest or domination, but by the willingness of its people to adapt, to learn, and to build a future together. The Emperor had begun his journey as a warrior, a conqueror. But now, he understood that his true challenge lay ahead, not in winning battles, but in uniting a galaxy torn by war and dissent into something greater than the sum of its parts. The Galactic Empire of the human race was not just a kingdom of stars. It was a living, breathing entity, shaped by the will of its people. And its future, for better or worse, was in their hands.